Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I'm chuckling a little bit because the office went from absolute silence, except for a police helicopter outside, because, of course, this is Los Angeles, to me boisterously, or whatever passes for boisterous in my body, doing this intro, and it surprised the dog. And Mabel jumped. So anyway, great episode today. This is Jerry Minor. If you don't know who Jerry is, why don't I read you his bio right now? Originally from Flint, Michigan, actor and comedian Jerry Minor came up doing comedy at Second City in Detroit, Chicago, and Toronto before joining Mr. Show for the 4th season. This was followed by stints at SNL, Primetime Glick, The Daily Show, as well as appearances on basically every great comedy from the last 2 decades. Delocated, Curb Your Enthusiasm, The Office, Arrested Development, Community, Detroiters, Special, and honestly, more than I have time to list here in this intro. Most recently, Jerry has been recurring on the hit sitcom Abbott Elementary. Hey, quickly, I want to run something by everyone. This just came up tonight. I was sitting and reading, and Naomi, my wife, was next to me, and she was also reading on her phone, and then out of nowhere, she goes, "Have you heard the creator of Cash App got stabbed?" And it made me think about how much of current reality feels like an episode of Jiminy Glick. This is what made me think of this, because Jerry had been on some episodes of Primetime Glick. Because out of nowhere, someone will be reading something on their phone that has nothing to do with whatever you're doing, and maybe there's just absolute silence, and then they puncture that silence with what seems to be a non sequitur, but in reality is very germane to whatever little world they are in on their phone. So it just feels like out of nowhere, someone's just like, "Have you heard the creator of Cash App's been stabbed?" It's my terrible Jiminy Glick impression, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about. Everything feels surreal, like a Jiminy Glick episode these days. Anyway, Jerry, what a wonderful guest. I've been a fan of his since Mr. Show, and it's always a delight to see him pop up in things. And of course, as a human being, what a good dude. Very nice conversation. We talk a lot about growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. In Jehovah's Witness, I never figured out the exact grammar, but kind of how that led to being a creative person and a lot of other stuff. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you do, why not check out other episodes of Beginnings? I just fixed the RSS feed. I've been doing this show for 13 years, but for some reason the RSS feed only limited the episodes to whatever the last 100 were. And there is almost 700 episodes of the show. So I just fixed it so you can go into the entire catalog. I don't know about the first couple years. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I can't remember. I had a co-host at that time. But what I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like. If you like my talk with Jerry, maybe you like my talk with other comedians. Maybe other comedians from Mr. Show like John Ennis or Becky Tyre. Maybe other comedians from a show that he was on called Crossballs, like Matt Besser and Andy Daly. Or people from The Daily Show like Roy Wood Jr., people from SNL like Sashir Zamata and Streeter Seidel. So check out those. Oh, Rich Fulcher. I also talked to him. He was on Crossballs. So check out those episodes. If you like what you hear, why not subscribe to the show? Why not follow me on social media at Andy Beckerman on both Twitter and Instagram? And coming up, a lot of great episodes. Next week, Satomi Matsuzaki from Deerhoof. That was a very good talk. So look forward to that. But for now, let's talk to Jerry. I find it interesting. In the last 20 years, my favorite Mr. Show sketch has always changed. And it's the one now for the last like 5 or 6 years from season 4 where you're at the talk show on the raft, which seemed like in a way, in the same way that like Springfield in The Simpsons has come to represent America, that is the most prescient vision of what America has become in a way that I haven't, like, not a lot of comedy has been like, nope, we nailed it. This is exactly this is this is, and I don't want to get into, I don't want to like get too far down the rabbit hole of dystopia, but
well, I mean, that sketch was pointedly making fun at the time of the reality show, and specifically Jerry Springer. But around that time, there were a few of them that were imitating him, and Jenny Jones, and when I think of it that way, that specifically what the sketch was making fun of, then yeah, it's not surprising. Like, of course, this is where we ended up. Yeah.
Okay, so you were born in Memphis, but how long did you live there before your family moved to Flint? I didn't mean to, by the way, I didn't mean to set up a dystopia then, hey, let's talk about Flint, Michigan. But I guess that's where those two things were intersecting in my head. But
right, as beginnings, I kind of figured we would talk about Flint a little bit, I listened to a few to episodes. I just got done listening to Terrence Winter this morning. That was really good.
Thanks.
Congrats. And that was a really good interview. I never heard him talk that much. That was really good. Yeah. Anyway, my family moved to Flint before I was, I think, 2. So I don't even remember Memphis growing up there. I did spend some time there, like after I graduated high school, but it was not like my hometown. Flint was where I grew up. Yeah.
Wait, what brought you back there after you graduated?
It's really a number of things. Kind of complicated, but I was just kind of looking to do something. And at the time, I was not going to college. What makes it the most complicated was that I was a Jehovah's Witness at the time, and so I was really dedicating my life to like preaching, and so I was down there doing that pretty much. Yeah, and I had a lot of family there.
Is that like missionary work? Is that the same thing like where you would go to like missionary work would be going to another country, but is this the same kind of thing where you have to proselytize, but you just go to, another area of the United States?
No, not necessarily. I mean, that was what I was kind of gearing myself up to do. So I was just kind of like getting used to going to different areas and doing that so that I would prepare myself to do that as a career, basically. And I had family there, so it wouldn't be, as difficult as a transition. That's the simplest explanation of what I was doing down there. But yeah.
Was that like gearing up to do that for a career or for I guess, did you think of it as a career or did you think of it like as a calling in a way?
Yeah, not so much of a calling. I didn't feel like, there was I didn't have a spiritual moment or anything like that. For me, it was more pressure, so, and a lot of just like, this is what I'm supposed to do. So I'm doing it.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
That I fully understand.
So that's probably why I'm not doing it right now.
My big question then is, because this was my struggle up through my late 20s until I felt I could really shed my parents' desires or the desires of the community, like what I thought they wanted from me, and I could go to New York and start doing UCB. How did you get out from under that? Because it was a really long, difficult, existential journey for me to like be able to say, like, discover, like really say out loud what I wanted from life as opposed to what other people wanted from me.
Yeah, that was kind of a long journey for me. First of all, for me, it was hard to kind of figure out. And, to make a long story short, a lot of my experience, I talked about in a special with Leah Remini that she did on Jehovah's Witnesses. Mm-hmm. And so I talked a lot about like what it was like for me growing up and what I was trying to do and how hard that was for me. And so specifically how I ended up getting out was, well, I got disfellowshipped. I got kicked out of the religion. And immediately I started to think of, what do I want to do with my life, or what do I like doing? And one of the things I like doing that I figured out that I could translate into the real world is I like joking around with people. And I was a class clown at school. And so, I mean, within a week of me, getting kicked out of that, and just trying to find my way, I went up on stage and started, trying to do stand up, and I went, had, some fits and starts, from that time until I actually like really, really concentrated on it, and it got in a second city and stuff like that. Before then, it was kind of the stand-up boom when I first started. So I just went to a stand-up club that was in, a local stand-up club. And in fact, I went to a club that was doing not even a comedy night. I think it was a talent show. I heard it on the radio, and I walked into the club and said, "Hey, I want to audition for the talent show." And they asked me, "What do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm a comedian." They're like, "Tell us some jokes." They were setting up the club that night, the workers. So I stood there and told them jokes. I don't think I actually went and did the actual talent show, but I stood there and did jokes. And then I think that was the first time I ever like did anything in front of anybody. And from then on, I went to the local comedy club, met a lot of comics. Got advice, started showing up at the comedy club and doing a few minutes, before a comic will go on and stuff like that. And then from then I started, like actually touring and doing some of the smaller clubs around Ohio and Michigan.
Wait, was there any inkling? Because this is similar. I mean, this is analogical to my own story. I got kicked out of grad school because I had been goofing around doing comedy stuff on the side mostly. I mean, I won't get into it. Again, long story short, I've talked about it myself before, but like, it was very obvious that I did not want to be there, and to everyone else but me. And I was just like, no, I love this. This is great. This is, even though I'm spending most of my time writing spec scripts at the time, or like, instead of writing my dissertation, I'm working on a Family Guy spec script. Why is that? But I could not be honest with myself. And were there inklings of this before, so that like when you got kicked out, that the revelation just like flooded in, that like, oh, this is what I want to do? Or did you have to like start really like thinking about like, shit, what is my future?
Yeah, no, it took some time, because the first time I went on stage at a comedy club, I did really well. And it was kind of like, oh, well, I guess this is what it's going to be like. And then subsequently, I bombed every other time that I went up on stage, But it got that spark in me of like, well, there's magic in here somewhere, like I have something. But that was just a matter of like me trying it out, and really, really liking it, and really, really like being addicted to it,
Yeah,
the feeling of like being up there. Yeah, so I think for me, I skipped some steps. Like I dropped out of this religion. I got kicked out, and then I went to college because that was something that was discouraged for me. Was seeking any kind of higher education. While I was in college, that's when I started doing stand up. So for me, it was just a time of exploration, and I was a little bit older than all my peers because I didn't go to college right out of high school, and so I was just trying to play catch up. So I was like, I dated, I got married. I went to school and dropped out, started doing stand up and stopped and quit and got a job all within like a couple of years, and it wasn't until I was married for a while, after I'd started stand up, hadn't really established myself at all, but was still dabbling in it, would still connect with friends, would still do shows from time to time, and was doing a lot more improv. I'd connected with some friends and started doing some improv shows, and we started doing some shows in local shows in Detroit and around in colleges and stuff, and we were doing more sketch kind of stuff. That was when I really found that my niche. Stand-up was hard. I felt like I could have found myself, but acting and writing and working with another team, that was where I found like, okay, now I'm really getting this. And during that time, I discovered Second City. I was working with a local group in Detroit. We were doing a sketch show, and the producer of that group, pretty much just put us together. She was a doctor, and her husband was a former baseball player. So she had disposable income. She had money.
Okay.
So she would fly from Detroit to Chicago every week to take improv classes. And then she would come back and go, hey, I learned this. Let's do this in our show. And one week we all took a trip to Chicago. She's like, you got to come. You got to see what I'm doing. I'm taking these classes or whatever. And when I went to Chicago and was blown away, loved it.
You got to learn third beats.
I mean, yeah, even more basic than that. And before that, I was kind of familiar with improv, but it was kind of a turnoff. The only improv I'd done was with what's the group?
Comedy Sports? Yeah.
Yes. And they were doing like a show in a bowling alley. And I tried to do a show with them. And it was during the seventh game of the World Series, and the whole crowd left because we were disturbing them while they were trying to watch the game. And it just was a big turnoff for me. I was just like, I don't like improv. And then when I went to Chicago, I saw what they were doing, and yeah, I loved it. And it just so happened within a few months after I got back from Chicago, they opened a second city in Detroit, and they had open auditions. I was shocked because I was looking into moving, maybe going to New York, LA, or Chicago. So I was looking into second city. I was looking into Groundlings. I was looking into what I could do in New York, like doing stand up in New York. And yeah, they opened a second city in Detroit. I auditioned, got in the first cast, and for me that was really the start of my career.
Had you resigned yourself? So before you got kicked out, had you resigned yourself like, this is my life?
Yes. Well, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even have no thoughts about being a performer. That just didn't come up for me. And even after I started doing stand up, the first time I went out, it was just a hobby for me. It was just something like I can do this now. Nobody's stopping me. I don't have any religious, any kind of ties, anything like that that's stopping me from trying this. And so I can do it. And that was the only reason that I was out at first. And it wasn't until I auditioned for Second City that I really started to think, like, maybe I can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, like, did you have any kind of ambition prior to leaving the faith at all, and that it was dampened down? Or did you just no ambition form because you couldn't see anything past the horizon of like, well, this is what I'm going to do with my life?
Right. I could do it. I was funny, so I definitely had the talent and the desire to make people laugh and to entertain people.
Okay, so you did have that. So even before you left, Jehovah's Witness,
all I did.
Okay, so that you did have that feeling, and you're like, I want this, but you didn't have a pathway where you could actually express it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And it didn't even seem real to me. I mean, I guess I was a really big fan of Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor, and I knew that they made movies and they did stand up, but I didn't even know until I went to a stand up club and talked to an actual stand up comedian. I watched the show, and I said, "Hey, how do you do this? What do you do?" I didn't know they got paid. I thought I didn't know anything. Those were all questions that I had. It just never came up. Back then it wasn't. I said it was a stand-up boom, but really we didn't have the knowledge about what stand-up was like, how they traveled around. We just like, hey, where they performed, I had no idea until I sought it out. I'd see a stand-up on television, see him telling jokes, and I don't know, I guess they go to clubs. What? I don't know. So, yeah, all that stuff was an education for me. But yeah, the desire and the quote unquote talent was there.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Talent was there.
I get it. Anything pre-internet, and if you didn't have any connections into this industry, how would you ever know? I had no idea.
Right.
I had no clue. My mom's a school teacher. We're from Pennsylvania. It's like, how would I find this out? I mean, maybe if you're lucky, you see a movie like The Player or something like that about Hollywood, and then you're like, oh, is that how it's done? Maybe, but I don't know. I didn't see that when I was a kid.
Well, yeah, and at least you had that because when The Player came out 90, I mean,
92, I think,
by then
like
92, yeah. So I was starting Second City then, even before then, there was nothing. You didn't I'm trying to think of anything that I had that was a background to like, because I remember when I first started doing improv and doing stand up, I was really, I did a lot of research as much as I could about Hollywood and show business and agents and things like that. And I would have to go to Barnes and Nobles and buy books, and buy a guide that had all the agents' names in them, and I could write agents and stuff like that, and and even before I left the religion, when I was still a Jehovah's Witness, I remember making tapes, cassette tapes, and I would make sketches, my own sketches on these cassette tapes. And I remember at a certain point in time, I made a tape for a friend, and he passed it around, and that got passed around, and there was a small group of people in our church that like, oh, Jerry's pretty funny, and it even got passed around the country. There were people in Boston who are like, hey, I got that tape that you made, whatever, that comedy tape. So yeah, that was if I was growing up now, I would have been making TikTok videos.
Right.
I would have had an audience that wasn't just my family, that, or just in the church, So yeah, it was, I guess it was a completely different time.
Yeah. So, okay, you're funny. Do you remember, this is going to be a weird question, but I'll ask it anyway and see if it leads somewhere. Do you remember like why you wanted to be funny, or what it was about being funny when you were younger that appealed to you?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was just a big relief, when I think about like school and just growing up in general, it wasn't that fun, and being funny was just a way to make the time go a lot better, in school and everywhere else. My mom was a pretty funny person, and I just learned that was a way to cope, So, yeah.
Okay. Like, what is it that you guys are coping with? Like, what's your day like, I guess, is what I'm curious about. And then we can go with that other question. Is it all school and then you have to go to church, or is that like your full day?
Yeah. It was like 24 hours for me. It was like go to school and then come home and maybe have a few hours to watch television or whatever. And then it was like start studying for whatever, service, whatever meeting that we had, whatever thing that I was trying to accomplish. Yeah. My life was pretty much immersed in that religion and the activities of it. Yeah.
So is the coping just like a way to like let some steam out because everything is so like so scheduled?
Yeah, everything's so intense and serious and not fun, and work. Yeah. For me, it was just a big relief. It was just a way to cope. And also, in the end, for me, after all of that, it was a way for me to, it was an easy way for me to use every part of I felt like my intellectual being. I can be different people, or I can be the fullest realized self that I want to be. I can use the highest of my intelligence if I want to, yeah. Just for me, it was just a way, an ultimate way of expressing myself, and especially in comedy, in that I've always felt like there were things that I could say, I could express how I was feeling or how I felt about something or an opinion, and making people laugh always made it easier to be able to do that.
So, okay, Flint, Michigan, when you're growing up there, like what is it like? I guess, what is the town like when you're growing up? I mean, we know what it's like now, but like, what was it like when you're growing up?
When I first, my first memories of it were, I have specific memories of what it was, like economically, and remembering when, sometime during the early 80s, the mid 80s, when it started to decline. So, my early childhood was like, Flint was a really vibrant, moving, full place. And then by the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s, my street, which when I moved there in the early 80s. It was a mixed race, middle class, working class kind of neighborhood. I wouldn't say upper middle class, but basically just middle class. Most of my neighbors' parents worked in a factory in some sort, like either Buick or Chevrolet or something for General Motors, or one of the feeder organizations that fed into General Motors. Like my mom worked for AC, which made spark plugs. And I worked for a number of places that worked around GM. My dad actually worked for the power company, but a lot of our other family worked for GM. But everybody in the neighborhood, pretty much. And then they started to close factories and start to lay off. And yeah, by the late 90s, 89, 90, my neighborhood was crack central. Crack and prostitution. I used to say I grew up on the corner of crack and prostitution. So yeah, I remember one summer it just like exploded, where it was a crack house on each side of the house where I lived in. I'm saying like I lived in a normal neighborhood, like every moms and dads, everybody had a lawn. People have a dog. Just like a mixed race neighborhood, white and black, until it was like just a ghetto. And now it's not there. I mean, it's just like gone. You can understand like our neighborhood could be gone. Like it is, nature has reclaimed it. It is just nothing there. Nothing but, I mean, most of the houses are raised in the neighborhood that I lived in on the street. I think there's only a few houses left on the street that I lived on. And before it was a poor neighborhood. So yeah, that was what it was like. I witnessed the decline of the city, in a matter of a few years. And it's still, and I'm always surprised at how much it's declined, and it seems like there's no bottom. Every time I go back, I'm like, oh man, it seems like, how could it get worse? But yeah, it's tough. It's rough.
I don't know if I realized that it was that drastic. My wife's family is from Detroit, so I kind of have seen like what, there, when you drive through parts of Detroit and there's just like these abandoned houses that like nature has taken over again. And you're like, oh, okay, I see how this is.
Yeah.
But I don't think I realized that it was, I only thought, I was like, oh, well, obviously like things have gotten bad in Flint now. I don't think I realized that it was, or like in the last, like, since they, got destroyed by whoever, the governor and everyone else.
Yeah. Stuff like that is a slow, usually a slow decline, and then all of a sudden it catches up to you. I think like the crack explosion was just something that was, happening all around the country, but it was just a bad mixture for Flint at that time. It was just a mix of economic decline and this new drug happening at the same time, and it was a perfect storm.
Yeah. Do you remember like the first time where you kind of noticed, oh, things are declining around me?
Yeah. I mean, I guess right around my senior year in high school to the year after I got out of high school, that year, I think would have been like 87, something around there. That was when I saw the biggest difference. And that was around the time the crack became a thing. I didn't even know what it was or what these people were doing, but people were lined up in cars,
right.
Going to houses and stuff. And, I knew that people were selling cocaine, but cocaine wasn't a drug like that. It was at that point in time, cocaine was a drug for like rich people, disco people, So yeah, just hearing people like everywhere around, like talking about cocaine was weird, and freebasing is what they would, I guess they would call it at first before it started calling it crack.
I guess I'm curious, not like to be prurient, but I'm wondering about your own kind of development as a person. Before this decline starts to happen, did you have a particular path? Is it always like, okay, I'm just going to follow in Jehovah's Witness. I'm always going to do something in this. Or does anything change through this, through the decline that you see around you?
No, I mean, and that's funny too, because a lot of people have a different experience than I do, and a lot of people that grew up maybe a Jehovah's Witness or in a similar kind of situation where they were like maybe had a something that was really controlling in their lives. They may have felt like growing up in a situation like Flint, Michigan, or some other declining city or situation, having something like a Jehovah's Witness organization help them out, and they were stronger for it or whatever, even though they're not Jehovah's Witnesses now, or they don't really believe in it now. Back then it was something that helped them get through a really tough situation because of where they grew up. And for me, it was not that at all. I mean, I used to think like, oh, maybe it was a protection, but one of the reasons that I lived in that neighborhood was because my mom wanted to stay in that neighborhood because it geographically helped out the numbers for Jehovah's Witness, in that area. I don't know exactly how, but somehow she was encouraged to stay in that area because they needed more Jehovah's Witnesses in that area, or whatever, stuff like that. Like, and at a certain point in time, I was like, we should move out of this neighborhood, but we stayed there for those reasons. And also, I mean, I was amongst it, I mean, the bullets that were flying in the neighborhood, they could still hit me just as well as they could hit anybody else. I'd had no kind of protection in that kind of way. And yeah, I wasn't out like, doing some of the things that some of the other kids in my neighborhood were doing, like, getting in trouble or in trouble with the police or getting in trouble with guns. Well, I shouldn't say that. Like, I found a gun in my garden. I had a little tomato garden in my house, and I found a rifle in the garden. And I remember, I hid it. I didn't think what I was going to do with it, but the first thing I did was went and told my friends that lived across the street, and they took it and went and tried to sell it and got in trouble. Got arrested. Like, but stuff like that. Like, I didn't have guns. I didn't, whatever. But I found one in my garden. I could have. Who knows what could have happened with that? I was a little kid. So yeah, I in hindsight makes me look at it not as much of a protection. I even though, yeah, I was pretty much steered into that direction, and I didn't do much of anything else. I didn't see it as a big help for me. There were other kids in my neighborhood who grew up and were successful and went on to do great things, more Jehovah's Witnesses,
Name them. Name them.
I was just thinking about this a wrestler. He was an All-American wrestler. His name's John Fisher. And his parents were friends with my parents, but I was watching Jim Jordan on the news and whatever. Jim Jordan was a wrestler at Ohio State, and my friend was a wrestler who lived down the street. He went to Michigan, and he was a world-class wrestler. He wrestled in the Olympics. He was actually one of the wrestlers. Now I can't remember the name of that movie. It was the Steve Carell movie about the guy.
I know what you're talking about.
He was one of the guys that went to live with that guy. He was one of the wrestlers. He had the best wrestlers in the United States come and stay there and train there. So my friend was one of those guys. But I saw Jim Jordan, and so I looked up the records because I was like, I think they wrestled around the same time, and they were like rivals in college, and because Jim Jordan won the national championship, and I said they won the national championship in '86 or '87. I was like, I think my friend won that year. Well, they went back and forth like for the 4 years that they were in college, going back and forth with who won that weight class or whatever. So yeah. Terry Crews, I went to high school with him. He lived in our neighborhood. I was like a year older than him. Not a year older, but a grade, a grade ahead of him. I think he's still older than me. Yeah, no. There's a few people. Yeah,
If you had said that
like
to me, I would be like, "There's no one. I'm the most famous quote unquote person from my high school. There's no one else." Betsy King is a
For a long time, I was. Yeah, for a long time, I was, and then Terry moved out to L.A. and yeah, I think he's got me. He's got me.
The reason I ask these questions is because I'm just curious about people who grow up in like again, like I said, circumstances where there's no connections to anything. And how do your ambitions form? How do your desires to do anything form when there's no obvious pathway open to you?
From my experience and talking to other people with, who've gone through like this and didn't grow up in LA or New York or in a big city, and even people who didn't know like what was across town, it's one thing that leads to another. You just take an interest in stand up, and then that leads to you acting, and that leads to writing or whatever, and then now you're a director. Or somebody likes comedy, and then they start writing, and then they find out that they can write drama or whatever, and then they become a writer. So for me, it was the comedy, knowing, liking, being funny, and then finding exactly what it was that I like to do in that.
Yeah.
And then since then, become okay. So now I'm an actor. That's what I like to do. And then expanding on that. Now I've gotten that down. Now I want to expand that. And I went to, I did a lot of writing, and I'm directing now. So, I guess it's just like a big cycle, if that's a way to describe it.
I mean, what was your household like when you were growing up? What's a typical day with your parents? Do you have siblings? That's a bunch of questions, but
well, I did. My mother and father were divorced, and so it was, for me, it was like two different places, two different lives, two different existences. My dad's house was very normal. I had a brother and sister, older brother and sister, from my dad's marriage. So I have a stepbrother and stepsister. We were all very close. All that stuff was normal. My brother, played football. He went to college on a football scholarship. My sister became a doctor. They're both really successful, normal, as normal as we can be. Fairly well adjusted people. They would probably have a different opinion of that, but I have another side, which was growing up with my mom. And with that side, it was just a single mom. We were Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's basically all I can tell you, is that we were Jehovah's Witnesses. She was single. Before she became a Jehovah's Witness, she was really involved in church, in other churches. She was always searching for something spiritual, but I think also like a family. She was an orphan. She was orphaned when she was 5. Her mother died. So I think she was always like kind of searching for something, some kind of belonging, for a group to belong to, and that group was kind of perfect for her in a certain way. So for me, when I wasn't at my dad's house, and like I said, living a completely normal life, going outside, playing with my friends, most of the time I was with my mom, going to meetings 3-4 times a week, going out in field services, what they call it, proselytizing. And my mom, for a lot of the time, was a minister, quote unquote, which meant in Jehovah's Witness speakness that they have a quota of time that they have to spend proselytizing. And so I was doing that a lot, especially as a teenager. And then in my later teens, me taking that on more myself and doing a lot more, not just being with my mom, but doing it myself, so doing the same thing.
Do you get to celebrate things at your dad's house, or even there are you like, well, I can't I can't have like a birthday, or I can't, celebrate Christmas or anything.
Yeah, eventually for me, I was like, I can't. So I didn't go to my dad's house on Christmas. I think after, I can't even remember the last Christmas that I had as a kid. It was definitely before I was like 8 or 9. So yeah, so I was still practicing even when I would go. Somewhat, most of the time I was still practicing when I went to my dad's house. Like I said, but for me, that was a good opportunity to be normal. But yeah, no, I wasn't going to get a birthday gift. I'd have to come home with it.
Did you feel normal when you were there, or did you feel like you were just pretending to be, again, this is quote unquote normal?
That's a good question. Yeah, for me, it was like two identities. So I can't really tell you what normal was. I think a lot of people that go through that kind of experience kind of can describe to you how you have a self that's the self that you are when you go to church and when people see you and when you're doing those things, and you have a self when you're at home by yourself, that real self, for a lot of people who grow up in an organization like that, might be hard to try to find. But I think for me, that was like my core self. Like that was who I really was when I was at my dad's house, or when I was at school and I was goofing around. That was when I felt like I was me, and the other person just felt like I was a put on personality, and actually that was what I was told to do. Put on the personality to, that's more acceptable.
Yeah, of course. That's a recipe for eventually there to be if you're hiding your real self. I'm like holding my one hand, your real self is my fist, and then I'm hiding it under my other hand, which is the fake self. That's eventually going to crack up in some way. It seems like something untenable for a person to have to deal with.
For me, that definitely happened, and for me, there was a big fight in between those two selves until finally, I was like, I can't. One self can't survive. But I've done a lot of research and study and talked to a lot of people who have been through experiences that I have, or like experiences that I have. People like Scientologists and
right.
People through other things that people consider cults, or people who've been through coercive kind of relationships. Even if it's just one person that they have, or they just didn't feel like they could be themselves, and there was some other kind of control, or some other person or some other force that was making them act in a way that they didn't really feel that was genuine to themselves. I think that from what I've learned, if you have a friend that's changed, let's say, if you have a friend that's gotten involved in some group or something like that, I think that the one thing that you can do that can get close to snapping out of them, or getting to that person, is remembering who they were, or who they are at a core, and trying to talk to that person. So if you've got a friend who is into QAnon, let's say, and and I'm saying that because a lot of people compare that to to something that I can't get through. You can't make sense. You can't have a conversation, that makes sense, and people just give up. And I say that if you can get to the person that was before they became QAnon, that person that doesn't care about that kind of stuff, that isn't concerned about that just likes a sunny day, and it likes a football game, and it likes those other things that aren't so serious, that usually is a way that you can get to. I shouldn't say usually. I feel like that's the only way that you can get to the core of the person and really get to what's happening with them, and hopefully get them to see the light, let's say, or get to see truth, or get them to see the way things actually are, is by really connecting to that person that they are at the core of themselves. Because a lot of times what you end up doing is you're talking to the QAnon person, and you're ended up debating all the facts that go along with that. no matter what they're into, you know. And if you really get to like, hey, you know, how are you doing? You know, how does this make you feel? What is it doing for you? What about the person that you were? Why did you feel like that's something that you have to, you know, add on to yourself, and not maybe in those words, but, you know, having a genuine curiosity about people also like helps a lot. I don't know why I'm giving you all this 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 help, but just to say that I think that having the experience of going through that and knowing what helped me at a certain point in time, maybe that can help other people.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because I've thought about this a lot lately since, I don't know, 2016. I wonder why that's the year where I started thinking about all this stuff. But it in a world, and this is also why I was curious a little bit about, like, as you saw the decline in Flint, like how you reacted to that, because now the decline is happening kind of everywhere. And you see a lot of people grasping, like, I think, you know, grasping for like Trump stuff or grasping for like QAnon stuff is part of this, like, everything's kind of falling apart. We don't know how to orient ourselves. And so I'm grabbing for the closest thing that makes any kind of sense. And even if that is like, you know, a story about Hollywood weirdos drinking kids' blood in the basement of a pizzeria, then like, okay, like you like it I don't obviously agree with, well, maybe you don't know that. You're like, what if I this guy that I'm talking to, like, suddenly, like, 45 minutes in is like
I listened to enough of you. I listened to enough of your podcast.
And another thing, the adrenochrome, I can't get it anymore. It's been cut off for me. But, like, they're grasping for something that helps them make sense of, like, because we were all told, I mean, you're a little older than me, but, like, I think we're close enough to the same age where we were told, like, hey, if you do these certain things, you're going to succeed in America. And then suddenly the rug is pulled out, and we're all just like, I don't know how to, like, I don't know what direction to, like, look towards anymore. I'm just, like, in a free fall. So I get the QAnon thing, even if I don't agree with it, or I probably don't even empathize with it because it's a little, but like I can, so like this idea, like this kind of like, the kind of headspace that you were in is now like, is now America, is now expanded to everything. So I do think it's really, it's really worth examining in a deeper way.
You know, things are changing really fast, and we're more connected than we've ever been before. And so for me, from what I see, is a lot of the same things that, you know, the social and psychological mixture of things that happen are just faster and more intense now because we're just so much more connected. There's more of us, and we have things that can make that happen. You know, I've never been more in an angry like state than during the internet and more particularly the social media era. I think about it all the time. That's why I got off social media. I'm like, I've never been this angry all the time. I mean, maybe in traffic a little bit in LA, but that's a good comparison. You're bumping into all these people that you don't know and you don't have any business even seeing, and rude, and a lot of stupid people because there's a lot of people in LA. So there's going to be, if there's more people, then there's more of a chance that you're going to meet more stupid people. And you know, for me, living in the city, you just get used to that, and you go like, okay, I know what I'm dealing with. You know, I've lived in New York, I've lived in LA. I know what traffic is going to be like. I can stop, I can get out of traffic. I cannot drive at 4 and at 7 in the morning. But man, that thing that's in your pocket all the time, or when you're at work and you're on, like, it's incessant. It's always on you. You know, I've tried to get rid of all kinds of every type of social media that I can, and I still look at Twitter every day, and I'm not even a member of Twitter, and I still do. I think that that's a part of like what is making us so anxious now, a combination of the things that have always made us anxious, with things changing, the world changing around us. And now we're just so much more aware of that,
Yeah.
of the world, how much it changes around us.
Yeah, well, it's filling in something, whatever that. And I've never had a feeling of spirituality in me, or I've never had a feeling of faith in me, but I've had the feeling of wanting that, and I think that this fills the phone. I think social media fills in that feeling of being connected, of being part of something larger than yourself, at the same time as it being completely bad for your mental health. So it is fulfilling something that nothing else outside of religion, and even now in the 21st century, like I don't know how much religion really fills in that. And and in a certain sense, like when you were talking, it made me really think about like, I don't know if you had that feeling of faith in you, but well, I'll just ask: did you have that feel when you were when you were part of Jehovah's Witness? Did you feel an actual feeling of faith inside you, like being a part of something that's larger than you?
Yeah, I did. I mean, and I believed every bit of it. I think that though, at a certain point, it just started to feel like this is something that just people are just telling me, and I started to go more on my feelings, to where when I got kicked out, I felt like that was for me, it was the most spiritual time in my life, because I was really like, just praying a lot. And I felt like I was just really searching for what I wanted. And now, no, I don't I don't feel that way at all. But, no, I did. I did feel it.
So, okay, this might be a little too easy, but I think there is something small there at the very least. But like that feeling that I've always wanted, that social media is like a very pale shadow of. I did find when I played music and I was part of a music scene, and I did feel and do feel in comedy, and then part of a comedy scene.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there was something like, okay, you leave the faith and now you're finding something that fills in that hole in some way.
Well, definitely performing felt that way. And as far as like as belonging to a group, working in an ensemble and, improvisation and working in sketch and stuff like that definitely brought that out of me. And that I think that was why I gravitated more towards that too.
Yeah.
And what I felt like also, it can go either way, but at the time when I was getting involved in a lot of improvisation, it just felt really empowering to me. I know that it can also get a little, classes can get a little culty, whatever. But for me, what I was taught, it really felt like it was empowering the individual to perform to the best of their ability, to bring whatever you as an individual had to the group, and that being really celebrated, all the differences of the group being celebrated, it's really the only way you can make really, really good comedy, is if you start to think about how we can all bring something different to this. If we're all bringing the same joke, and then it's not gonna be funny for very long. You really start to understand when you start to work with a group, like, oh, you're funny in that way, I'm funny in this way, I answer you in this way. This is how makes the whole thing work. And it's much more satisfying for me than it was doing it by myself. I didn't think it was necessarily easier or harder. It was just a different thing, but really satisfying to know that you can work with somebody and, oh, hey, it makes you feel good to know that you're in synergy with somebody else. And, and that hey, this is a good idea that we have now. We both have this good idea. It's something that you don't get working by yourself.
Yeah. I mean,
I think a lot of that did replce that. Sorry.
Yeah. No. I was just like, it just like popped into my head, but like, I've never felt more, I I don't even know what the word is. I was going to say in tune with the universe. That was the phrase I was going to say, but I don't really mean that. What I really mean is that in doing improv with other people and doing like long form improv, right? There you create this kind of field. These are bad metaphors, but I where stuff like just emerges out of that, and in a way that like it wouldn't just. And it's the same way for any like joking around with people, like riffing with people, right? You're creating this kind of like context. You're creating this like field where this stuff that just emerges out, and the idea of group mind connects you in that larger way. It's the same group mind of like whether you're just like riffing with your friends watching a bad movie or, you know, doing a Harold or something like that. It's that same kind of feeling. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
I know I'm just like putting bad pieces together at the moment, but
most definitely. I mean, talk about, you know, I directed a show in Chicago over the summer. And for me, it was a lot about getting back to that. But it was really good for me to observe what I was actually going through when I was in a cast and how casts can come together. And it just all came right back to me. But it was really cool to watch it happen from the outside, too, you know, and kind of direct it, you know, rather than being in it. Because when you're in it, you're just in it. It's almost like hypnotism. Almost. It is. You know, it's a form of it. It's the way that we connect. It's the way human beings connect, and you know, and that's why there's a good feeling behind it. It feels right. It's the way we've survived to be what we are now. You know,
that seems like an actual very nice place to end, Jerry. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, man.
By the way, as we were talking, my brain was just like, you know that you've seen Roger and me, Andy. Why did you think that Flint started to decline with the water crisis and not? And not before. You remember the history. I don't know why I was started to, but in my brain it was just like, well, obviously, like the worst thing that's happened to Flint is the water crisis, and not factory shutting down.
Well, I mean, you know, it's all a part of it, right? You know, the factory shutting down and nobody caring about Flint for 30 years leads to them going like, well, just
if no one
water
cares
on the river, who cares? You know, nobody's there. No, there's 100,000 people here. But yeah, it's the whole thing, and that's what I meant by like it's still declining. I can't believe like there's no bottom to this.
I just wanted you to know that I'm not ignorant of history, just so we're clear. That's why I said that. So you're just like, you get off.
It's not in our radar every day. I get it.
This dope I talked to doesn't understand any history before like 2012.
Did you grow up in New York?
No, Pennsylvania, Reading, Pennsylvania.
Oh well, I mean. It's not, you know, there's some parts of Pennsylvania that are like,
100%. Pennsylvania, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I grew up in what's called Pennsyltucky. Like it is
Kentucky, yes you did, yeah.
Yeah. It is it's declining in the same way like every other part of America is declining.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a
when you say stuff like that, because when you talk about, when you're saying like decline, I'm like, well, yeah, but when you talk about, yes, that part of middle America, the parts that we grew up in, I mean, I feel like it's not there anymore, you know? That is really scary to me. I don't know. Everybody can't live in California, you know? And I think people are moving back. There's this, so I think that will happen maybe, but it is weird to see that kind of thing happen around the United States.
Yeah. Well, you know, young white musicians are buying houses in Detroit too.
Right.
So there's the renaissance of the city.
Right. Yes.
All right, Jerry. Well, thanks again for joining me. What a delight.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, 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 bye. Bye. Beginnings begin.